lesson 5, the book of Judges, and we are starting with one of my favorites, if not my favorite of the judges, and that is Deborah. And we're going to spend a few weeks with Deborah because there's just so much here to talk about. And so what I want to do today is kind of go through the introduction of the setting of what's going on and what makes this important, and also discuss a little bit of perhaps our traditional reading of the story of Judges, the story of Deborah, and some things that might be off with that. And so anyway, key observations that we have been looking at over the last few weeks when we look at why this sort of cycle of problems that Israel is getting themselves into in the book of Judges is that one of the reasons is that when they go into the promised land and they begin to take it, there are a number of key sites, especially the ones that control the trade routes, that they do not control. And because they don't control them, it guarantees that there is going to be conflict with their neighbors. And how do they respond to that conflict? Well, marriage is an economic and political tool in the ancient world, and so the Judges tells us at the very beginning that they do political alliances through marriage by marrying their sons and their daughters to one another. And if you read the text carefully and sequentially, it says they did this. They failed to capture these key places. They married their daughters to the sons of their neighbors, and they married their, and vice versa, they married the daughters to the sons of their neighbors, and then they worshipped other gods. And what this tells us is that economic and political decisions that we make have theological consequences. And that's how the book of Judges starts. And then we see this cycle repeat over and over again. And there we get this little interlude before we get to Deborah, of what we call a minor judge. And we will talk about the minor judges in a lesson later on in this study. But I want to just point out quickly something about Shamgar. It says in Judges chapter 3, verse 31, after him came Shamgar. This is after Ehud, who we talked about last week. After him came Shamgar, son of Anat, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad. He too delivered Israel. So, who is Shamgar?
Son of Anat.
Okay, he's the son of Anat. Yeah. So here's the, yes, always count on my wife. Who is it? Who is Anat? Anat is also the name of a Canaanite god. And a lot of scholars think that Shamgar is a Canaanite. That he's not even an Israelite. It's not an Israelite name. Okay? It's a Canaanite name. And what is he known for?
Kill Philistines with an ox goad. The world is an ox goad.
An ox goad? Okay. Yeah, so an ox goad is basically the prod you use to prod the ox along. Maybe a jockey whip. I don't know what our modern equivalent would be, right? You know, a cattle prod maybe. And he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. All right? Does that sound similar to anybody else? Oh yeah, boy, Samson takes the jawbone of a donkey and slays a whole bunch of Philistines. Okay? Curious details. All I want to say about it is that basically Shamgar seems to be a Canaanite that raises up and delivers Israel, apparently from the Philistines. Yes, sir?
When they do things like with an ox goad, are they using hyperbole? Because you think an ox goad is probably like a long stick, right? That he's so powerful he was able to kill 600 men with a long stick. Are they just being poetic here?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. And that's a matter of debate. I think they probably are. It's a hyperbole. It's a great feat. right? That he takes some everyday sort of weapon and just pummels all these Philistines. So it's denigrating the Philistines, at the same time it's placing this guy up as sort of a hero, right, that has done this mighty deed. Okay? So good. So that's Shamgar. And then we get what starts the Canaanite Hazarite cycle, is what it's often called, because this is remember last time we looked at the Moabite cycle, right, where Ehud delivers the Israelites from the Moabites. And now we get the Canaanite cycle, or the Hazarite cycle. And it says in Judges chapter 4, the Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. So the Lord sold them into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron and had oppressed the Israelites cruelly for 20 years. So my first question is, where have we seen Jabin and Hatzor before? Does anybody know where they might show up in the stories? Well, it turns out that they show up in Joshua 11. And so Joshua is leading the Israelites into the land, and they have just conquered or taken over the hill country of Ephraim. And it says in Judges 11, when King Jabin of Hatzor heard of this, he sent to King Jobab of Madon, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Achshaph, and to the kings who were in the northern hill country, and the Arabah, south of Kinnerot, and in the lowland, and in the Nephoth Dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and in the west, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites under Hermon in the land of Mizpah. Everybody and their small dog, basically. They came out with all their troops, a great army in number, like the sand of the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. All these kings joined the forces and came out and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight with Israel. And then there's a battle, and then we get a few verses later, Joshua turned back at that time and took Hatzor and struck its king down with the sword. Before that time, Hatzor was the head of all those kingdoms, and they put to the sword all who were in it, utterly destroying them. There was no one left to breathe, and he burned Hatzor with fire. And all the towns of those kings and all their kings Joshua took and struck them with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded. But Israel burned none of the towns that stood on tells, except Hatzor, which Joshua did burn. Now, what's your impression of King Jabin? Defeated and what?
About Joshua.
Yes, and what else? Not just defeated. He was destroyed. He was killed. And as with all the other kings, he was devoted to destruction. Haran is the term in Hebrew. Devoted to the Lord, devoted to destruction, burned up. What else do we know about him? What does he do with all these other kings? He summons them all together. So, he lives in Hatzor. He is the king that summons all these other kings together. He is the big kahuna, right? He is the big king for the area.
He built an alliance.
And he built a big alliance to go battle the Israelites, okay? And if you were to point out on a map of all the places that we know on that, he's pulling them from the far south to the far north, as far as he can go to the west and as far as he can go to the east. He is literally getting everybody together.
It sounds like he really knew what Israelite was capable of.
Okay?
Right? I mean, I know he did win, right? But he was trying to be as absolutely prepared.
He wanted to end this, to nip this in the bud completely. Is what he was trying to do. Okay? Well, I love my maps, and so we're going to look a little bit at the maps to see what's going on here. And we've talked before about the primary trade routes that run in this land. And on the The left, you have the route that runs by the sea, the coastal highway, that runs from Egypt all the way up through Israel and the Promised Land, and then it cuts through the Jezreel Valley around Megiddo, and then up around the Sea of Galilee, and up to Hatzor, and then over to Damascus, and from there it goes across over into Babylon, and places to the east. It also goes to the north to Phoenicia, which is just a little bit off the map, and then it even goes further up into Asia Minor, which is called later, or modern-day Turkey today. So these are the main trade routes. The one on the right is the Desert Highway, or sometimes called the King's Highway, that runs along that eastern side, just on the edge of Moab and Ammon and Aram, and then with the desert on the right. Okay? And if you'll notice, Hatzor sits kind of right at that junction of those trade routes, and I want to look a little closer. You see there at the bottom, the Sea of Galilee. You see how that trade route kind of runs up to Hatzor, and then two roads diverge from there. That little thing called the Rosh Pinah is not a place, it's a geological feature. This area, if I go back one, you can see that sort of dark is low elevation between the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. Two tectonic plates have pulled apart. And that Rift Valley, they call it the Rift Valley, runs all the way up to Eastern Europe and all the way down to Africa. It's been pulled apart. The Dead Sea is the lowest point on the face of the earth at, 1,200 feet below sea level, I believe. And then the Sea of Galilee still sits at 400 feet below sea level. And what happens is, because you have all these tectonic plates and all this activity, you get a lot of earthquakes, but you also get volcanoes. And in fact, not far, it's not shown on this photo, but there's a fairly famous volcano that's now called the Horns of Hittim, that kind of point up like two horns sticking up out of the ground. It's an extinct volcano. And what you have in the Rosh Pinah is you have a volcano that tried to form. And so what it did is it lifted up the earth, okay, and created this sort of big mound that one thing it does is it blocks up the water flowing from the north. So you have that area that I've labeled there is called the Hula Basin, which collects water. And it also then narrows how the water funnels down into the Dead Sea. And that is actually the Jordan River north of the Sea of Galilee. Just to give you an idea of how the land has changed, or the landscape changes, here's sort of a 3D view, and you can see where Hatzor is, and you can see that Rosh Pinah lifting up, and that influences how the trade can run through the region. You just can't go wherever you want. The roads have to sort of follow the natural terrain. And Hatzor sits at a place that controls two major routes. And as a result, it's a very important and very big city. And in fact, Hatzor is the most important city in the late Bronze Age in what's called the southern Levant, in that area. And it controls access to both Damascus and then on to Persia and Babylon and to Phoenicia. Whoever controls Hatzor controls the trade. Like in Dune. Whoever controls the spice controls it, right? It's the same thing. You control Hatzor, you control everything. And in fact, it is one of the major cities on what's called the tin route. Okay? Because to make bronze, you need what two things? Anyone know? You need copper and you need tin. Well, it just so happens that there's a lot of copper mines well far into the south along the Dead Sea. And then the tin, believe it or not, some of the tin that's been found has come from as far away as England that makes its way in the late Bronze Age into this town. And Hatzor is a major player along that tin route, trading in copper and trading in tin. And in fact, it was so important that it may have been bigger than Babylon at this time. It is a major, major city. And so we get to Judges 4, and it tells us that God raises up King Jabin, Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor, and his commander of his army to oppress Israel. So what's the natural question we have about King Jabin?
He was defeated by Joshua. How was he still alive?
Oh, I thought Jabin was dead. Yeah. What in the world is going on? Why do we have a King Jabin of Hatzor when I thought Joshua just destroyed Hatzor in the book before?
Maybe taking somebody's name of a previous king that was not
Ah, okay. So yeah, so we've got some differences to reconcile here, okay? And let me just start off by saying, first of all, there's no easy answer to this. Option one, the story of Deborah occurs before the story of Joshua. That's one possibility. Because remember, the book of Judges is not chronological. It's telling a story of cycles. Another option is that the name King Jabin is a later insertion into the text, a later error. Another option is a different King Jabin. Okay, maybe it's his son. Possible. And another option is that we have two different traditions about Hatzor's battles with Israel that both get preserved in the text.
I don't think it could be option three because they destroyed every single person.
Ah, okay. And again, that's more hyperbole. That's what we call a conquest text. Okay? And we see these all over the ancient world where so-and-so king goes and goes up against some enemies that's a foreigner that's been oppressing them and utterly destroys everything. Burns everything, kills all the animals, doesn't leave a soul left living. And it's clear it's a type of literature. And so it's an exaggeration. And the reality is when you compare these four options, none of them gives you a perfect answer. And the truth is only God knows how to reconcile them. If you were to put a gun to my head, I probably think number 4 makes the most sense. But again, I'm not married to any of these. Just to remember that there is a discrepancy in the text, and it has no bearing on the story other than the fact that there is something we ought to at least be aware of. So, I want to first focus on what seems like a small detail in this story, but I think has some pretty significant theological consequences. So if you recall from last time, after Ehud defeats King Eglon and the Moabites, it says the land had rest for 80 years. And we know that 40 is a number that represents a generation. And so what we read at the end of the Moabite cycle is that the land has rest, has peaceful quiet for 2 full generations before the cycle starts over. And then it says the Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died, and they get delivered into the hand of King Jabin. And it says that the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help because he had 900 chariots and oppressed Israelite cruelly for 20 years. And my question is, what's the significance of the 20? Half a generation.
Another group of young men growing up to face the hardship.
Okay. So what we have is another group, another generation has grown up that does evil. And halfway through that generation, what happens?
The Lord delivers us.
The Lord delivers them. So I want you to think about the theological implications of that for just a minute. The land has rest for 2 generations, quiet for 2 generations after Ehud. Then the next generation sins, and they're oppressed by King Jabin for 20 years. Yahweh doesn't wait a full generation before he brings about deliverance. In other words, the evildoers experience Yahweh's deliverance. He doesn't give up on the people that have fallen into sin, into idolatry.
That way they remember that he was the deliverer and what they was being delivered from.
Yes.
They didn't have to have them stories told from their ancestors
Yes.
of the evil. They had experienced it themselves.
They experience the deliverance themselves.
They experienced the evil and the deliverance.
Yes. And that makes them a lesson for following generations. And I think that's an example of the beauty that we see throughout the Scripture, throughout the Hebrew Bible, of the fact that God keeps his covenants no matter what. Such that even when this generation does evil, he doesn't just write them off and say, well, I'll fix it in the next one. He deals with it in that generation to bring them redemption and them restoration so that they can tell the following generation about the redemption that they received and the sin that they committed that required it. And all that's wrapped up in one simple number, 20. Yes, sir.
So I always go back to Joshua 24, 14, 15, where he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord after they shared possession of the land and divided everything out. But before he said that, one of the verses says, when you serve the gods of your forefathers, you do what they did. When you serve the gods of this land, but we're going to do this, so that's the generation that comes in and says,
Yes. Yeah. And we actually see that even in Judges it says there arose a generation that, basically did not serve Yahweh. And he sells them over. So this cycle is also in the generations of who will you serve, right? And so, in this case, I think it's the same thing. We're going to see this cycle over and over again. So I've talked about looking at how long the land has quiet rest, because we're going to see that number change. But also it's good to look at how long does the oppression last before Yahweh does something about it. That's important too. All right. Now we get to Deborah. At that time, Deborah, a prophetess, wife of Lapidot, was judging Israel. She used to sit under the date palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came up to her for judgment. So who is Deborah? How is she described? She's a prophetess, okay. What else?
She's married.
She's married, okay.
She's a judge.
She's a judge.
She's a very important person.
Okay, she's a very important person, okay.
Who assigned her as a judge?
Who assigned her as judge? That's a very good question. The text seems to indicate that it's God that does it. Notice that it doesn't say she was raised up, like we see with some of the other judges that God raised up some judge. It's a statement of fact. She is doing this. She's recognized in advance of this for this ability. What else do we see?
She has a place named after her, the date palm of Deborah.
Okay, she sits under a date palm tree. Okay, and it's between Ramah and Bethel or Bethel. Okay. All right, and what else do we know about her?
So the Israelites came to her.
The Israelites come up to her for judgment. And I was looking at this morning, and it's really fascinating. I may talk more about this next week. If you look at what the text says about Sisera, okay, and the verbs that it uses to describe Sisera and how it describes Sisera, there's a parallelism and a contrast between Sisera and Deborah. It uses the same verbs to describe Deborah that it uses to describe Sisera. It's hidden in our English a little bit. And even the structure is the same. And whereas they were oppressing Israel, Israel is coming up to Deborah for judgment. Okay, so there's this comparison and contrast. So, We see, first of all, that she's a prophetess. She is the wife of Lapidoth, and something that I find interesting is I think wife of Lapidoth is the right translation. There is another way to read the phrase, and that is, she is a woman of fire. Lapidoth means fire or torch, okay? And the word eshet, which means woman or wife, can mean woman or wife. So the question is it describing her relation to her husband, or is it describing her personality?
She read it.
She's what?
She read it.
Or she read it. Oh, that's a good one. I hadn't thought about that. Which actually is a legit possibility. I had not thought about that. That's a good assessment. Either way, she's a woman of fire. Okay? And I think there might be something to that. And maybe what the writer wants you to question is, well, which is it? Maybe it's both. Okay? She sat under a date palm tree, which we kind of think, well, okay, why a date palm tree? Why sitting under a tree? Well, first of all, between Ramah and Bethel is almost in what you might consider to be a geographic center between the north and the south in the hill country of Ephraim. And also, trees are traditionally sacred spaces. If you see people doing something around trees or dwelling around trees, there's often a sacred context to the trees.
It's usually water also. That's not.
Which is also, water is also, especially in a land like Israel, water is also a sign of sacred space. If you go to the trip with me in Israel, we will come to some places that are hugely significant, sacred places, regardless of what party's living there, and it's because of water and trees. It's a sign of life. The Garden of Eden, water and trees. Same concept. She's an oracle of Yahweh, sitting amongst a sacred tree. And all Israel came to her for judgment. Now, does the text judge her negatively for these actions? There's not a negative word in it. It's a statement of fact. So, then says, she sent and summoned for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take position at Mount Tabor, bringing 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali and from the tribe of Zebulun. I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the Wadi Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give it into your hand. Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh. And so what I want to focus on is this exchange between Deborah and Barak. And how have you heard this exchange interpreted? She asks him to go. She commands him, Yahweh has told you to go and fight this battle. And his answer is, I will go if you go with me. I will not go if you won't go with me. To which she replies, I will go. And the glory is going to go to a woman, not to you. How have you heard this interpreted?
I've heard that Barak was pictured as a coward that maybe didn't really believe Deborah had her role legitimately.
Okay. He's a coward. He lacks faith. He doesn't believe that she's the legitimate voice
Or
of...
at least that this certain prophet thing that she's coming about with now, this prophetic passage is not real. He's
Okay.
doubtful of this.
Okay. Did I hear another...
Well, it's somewhat also in the book of Ruth, including Ruth and Naomi, right?
Mm-hmm.
She was also stubborn, her husband died, and she had to trust.
Okay, so level of trust. Okay. Okay.
Well, in a way, he's sort of doing his due diligence, because I don't know if I believe, he obviously isn't completely convinced that she has a direct line to God.
Okay, okay.
It's a shame. It's like because of this, there's a shame that
Because, say that a little bit louder.
because of what you're not doing correctly, it's shameful, embarrassing things that happen.
Lack of trust is shameful, and therefore, he's not going to get the glory. It's going to go to a woman. Is that
Believers.
okay? Okay.
Why did she call him? What is it about him? Call from afar to come and both work with her.
Yeah, that's a good question. Why does she summon him? It would seem that that's part of the oracle of God, right? That he's called. He says to her, "Summon him down here and give him this word." That's a good. We don't know. All we know is that this is the first time we hear about him.
So one of my notes when I was reading said that Barak means lightning.
Yes.
And the word lapido is spartus, is also used in thunder and lightning. So some commentators think that he was Deborah's husband.
Interesting that he was Deborah's husband. Interesting. That sounds like a very rabbinic connection to make there. Yeah, that's okay. Cool. Cool. Yep.
I think this is a very patriarchal discussion. The reason I'm saying that is I don't think this story is about Barak. I think it's about Deborah and showing her strength and her faith in God.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So the question is, why does Barak want Deborah to go with him? Safety.
Most people, our good leaders, pick people to take with them. And Barak's just like, okay, yeah, but it's better if we take some extra power here, and Deborah's got the power, so let's take her.
All right. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I see it slightly different. He doesn't really believe. And so in his mind, I'm going to take her with me. And when she's wrong, she's going to get killed. That's his attitude. Or she won't go with me because she'll get killed.
Okay.
This may not be true.
Yeah. So let me just go a little further, because here's a traditional reading that I've sometimes heard from this. And that is that Barak's insistence that Deborah go with him is because he lacks faith in Yahweh. That he's not convinced that they're going to be able to beat Sisera and Hatzor and that massive army, and so he wants her to go too. For whichever reason, either she's going to die or for some other reason. And therefore, Deborah says, fine, you're not going to get the glory. It's going to a woman. In other words, Deborah's going to get the glory, not Barak, because he lacks faith. And the conclusion that gets drawn from this, and I've actually heard people say this from the pulpit, the conclusion is that Deborah is really only a judge because no man would step up and take their God-ordained role.
Was there anything that...
Yeah, I'm so glad people laugh at that now. Because that interpretation is problematic on virtually every single level of the text. And if I hope you've learned one thing about me throughout these studies that we do, is that I try to read the text very, very, very closely. Okay? And so here's what I think is probably a better reading of this text. Deborah is an established judge and a prophetess before she ever summons Barak. Okay? There is no negative indication. She is not a sign of Israel's sin and idolatry. She is God's elect oracle to the people. End of story. Barak's request is a wise one because he knows and recognizes that she is the oracle of Yahweh. And therefore, you want the closest thing you have to Yahweh with you when you go into battle.
Similar to taking the Ark of the Covenant with them.
Very much similar to taking the Ark of the Covenant, okay? You'll notice there's no mention of the Ark anywhere around here, okay? But she is the closest thing, and so he wants her to go too. It's kind of a prudent military decision. Alma, kind of know what you said. It's a wise thing to do. And the glory going to a woman, which by the way is to Jael, not Deborah, is not a judgment against Barak. It is a judgment against Sisera and King Jabin. And the way that the text is structured in Hebrew is it's not, because you have said this, the glory will go to a woman. It says, fine, I will go with you, but just so you know, okay, the glory is going to a woman. It's not going to you. It's preordained that that's God's plan for what's going to happen, and it's because it's a judgment against Sisera and Jabin that Israel's women, it's not even an Israelite woman, it's someone that should be in alliance with him, is going to violate him. And as we'll see in the next few weeks, in a very sexual way. In a very sexual way. So the way that this story gets translated traditionally that says Deborah is only a judge because no man would step up just doesn't hold up in the text. I'm sorry, but that's our 20th century patriarchal reading of the story. Deborah is a judge in her own right, and a prophetess and an oracle. And as a result, Barak says, I want you with me. So, Hatzor and King Jabin controlled the region's primary trade routes. They are a big deal. Yahweh's grace and mercy, as we've seen, are demonstrated in that Yahweh delivers this generation with Deborah from their sins, not from the sins of their fathers or the previous generation. Deborah is a respected prophetess, oracle, and judge of all of Israel before this incident ever takes place. And Jael's victory over Sisera, as we will see, is predetermined by Yahweh as judgment against Jabin and Hatzor, not against Barak's supposed lack of faith. So for next week, we're going to continue to look at Deborah and Yael. And I'd like you to reread Judges chapter 4 and think about where does this battle take place and why? What is it that actually defeats Sisera's army? See if you can find that in the text. Who is Yael? Because it's kind of important. And we'll pick this up next week. Any questions, anything before we finish? All right. Thank you all very much. We look forward to seeing you next week.